Okay, guys. Real quick, we're gonna do notes on the overview of the presidency. It's 4B2, and this is assignment 3, I believe, in our notebook. So, let's go ahead and get started. They're pretty quick. All right. What are the qualifications to be the president? Do you remember? How old do you have to be? 35 years old. Yep. You have to be born in America. This is important. Okay. Arnold Schwarzenegger was governor of California, but he cannot be president of the United States because he was not born here. You need to be at least 35 years old, and you need to have lived here for at least the last 14 years. So maybe you were born in America but when you were 5, you moved to England, and let's say you just moved back, you can't run for president. You need to move back and live here for 14 years if you want to run for president. All right, and there's been a trend lately since 1976 that Americans want to kind of elect an outsider, quote unquote, to the White House. Somebody who says like, I didn't come from Washington. I come from, say, California. I'm the governor of California. I cleaned up my state. Those people in Washington, they could use my help. Washington's a mess. Elect me. I don't play the games that they play. That kind of thing. If we look at our last presidents, since the later 70s, we have Jimmy Carter. He was governor of Georgia, so he didn't actually work for the federal government. He was elected president. We have Ronald Reagan, governor of California. He didn't actually work for the federal government, but he was elected president. Bush was his vice president, so he kind of rode on Reagan's coattails. Clinton, governor of Arkansas, an outsider, and he was elected president. Bush, governor of Texas. The only one, Obama, he was a senator from Illinois, but even still, look, he was barely a senator. He was only a senator for 3 years, so he's the only guy up here with federal experience, and even that experience is really brief, just 3 years long, which is why a lot of his opponents called him inexperienced. All right, the term of office for the president is 4 years, like we know. The maximum you can be elected is 2 terms. This was done by tradition with Washington. Of course, Franklin Roosevelt broke this tradition when he ran and won 4 times. We had some other people run 3 times, but they didn't necessarily win, like Teddy Roosevelt. Um, there's a term for when somebody does something and it's kind of the standard, or they're like the first person to do something. Washington set a precedent, and that's not the same word as the title of our notes, a precedent. So Washington ran 2 times, was president for 8 years, and he set the precedent of serving 2 terms. And this was kind of followed by tradition until FDR. And then after FDR, um, the Republicans were kind of, pissed off a little bit that he had been elected 4 times, and they thought, let's try to put a stop to this kind of behavior in the future. So they passed not just them, but America passed the 22nd Amendment, so that nobody could serve more than 2 terms unless you were, say, the vice president and the president was killed in office. So it is possible to serve just under 10 years in office if you're the vice president and you become president in the middle of a president's term. You can do the math and figure out if it's like 9 years and 364 days. You know what I mean? You could serve as president. But if it's anything over that, then you would only be able to run one more time. An example of this is JFK was shot and killed, I think, in the 3rd year of his presidency. And then Lyndon Johnson became president, and then he ran again. And mathematically, he could have chose to run yet another time, but he actually chose not to because Vietnam had made him pretty unpopular, and he knew that he would not win re-election. So there you go. Lyndon Johnson succeeded JFK in '63 and was therefore eligible to be elected twice. Gerald Ford succeeded Nixon in 1974, but he served so much of Nixon's term that he was only eligible to be elected once. Remember when Nixon resigned, his vice president took over, Gerald Ford. All right. Funny story about Gerald Ford. He's the only person ever to serve the presidency who was not elected to the presidency or even the vice presidency. Because when Nixon was elected, he wasn't even the vice president, but Nixon's vice president resigned because of tax evasion or some lying on his taxes, and Gerald Ford took over. So it's kind of funny. Ford became president. No one ever cast a single vote for him. All right, what does the president get paid? Well, this payment is set by Congress, and it cannot be lowered or raised while the president is in office because you don't want them to basically be bribing the president. And the salary was first raised from $200,000 to $400,000 in 2001. So this was the first time that the president had seen a raise since 1969. But there are lots of other perks to being president, I'm sure you can imagine, including when you retire from the presidency, you give, usually most presidents since Gerald Ford, I believe, they travel around and they give speeches and they're paid a ton of money to do it. Reagan was paid $2 million by a Japanese company just to make 3 speeches. Bill Clinton is probably the most expensive speaker in the world. He gets paid, I mean today, obviously Reagan got paid nice there, but on average, Clinton today earns $300,000 per speech that he gives. So when you see these guys and they're speaking at, say, like colleges and things like that, you can bet they're getting paid to give their speech. Of course, you make a lot of money from writing your books too. When you retire, you write your memoirs about your life. Nixon did this, Clinton did this. Clinton received $12 million in advance from his book publisher to write the book. Maybe you'll even serve on a corporate board of directors. While you're president too, you get all kinds of like spending perks and expense accounts, and you get to fly Air Force One all over the place. I mean, $400,000. On one hand, it sounds like a lot. On one hand, it doesn't sound like a ton. But all the other perks that come into it are pretty beneficial. Okay, succession. Who takes over when the president dies? When the president dies, who takes over? Come on, that one's pretty obvious. The vice president. Okay, but do you know who comes after that? So, if the office of the president is vacant due to death or impeachment, the vice president becomes president, and the vice president will then nominate his own vice president, and Congress will confirm it. So he can pick whoever he wants. Congress will just have to vote yes on it, a simple majority. If the vice president dies before his inauguration as president, let's say he never got to pick a vice president, or let's say the president and the vice president die in a helicopter crash or something, the Speaker of the House would become the president, then the Senate President pro temp, and then the Secretary of State, Secretary of Treasury, Secretary of Defense, and they actually have this going all the way up. So all these people, secretary, they're in the cabinet positions, and basically in order that these cabinet positions were created is the order in which these people would become president. So if something terrible happened and someone dropped a bomb on the White House, God forbid, and killed like 11 people and 8 of them were in the cabinet, it would go all the way to the 9th person in the cabinet that would become the president based on its creation. So I think when America started, we had 3 cabinet positions. Now we have something like 12 or 13 or something. So well, you got it. This was figured out with a bill called the Presidential Succession Act of 1947. If the president is disabled, then there are rules that apply. For instance, Ronald Reagan had heart surgery when he was president, and while he was unconscious, they actually had his vice president as the current president. So the president informs Congress of disability, and the vice president becomes the acting president. So while Reagan was out, the vice president became president for like 10 hours or whatever it was. If the president is unable to inform Congress, like they're in a coma, then the vice president and a majority of the cabinet secretaries can go to Congress and receive approval for the vice president to become the acting president. So if Reagan was driving, got in a car accident, he never had time to get permission, the cabinet can go to the Congress with the vice president and kind of get approval that they're the new president. In either case, the president regains his power by informing the Congress of his intent to return. In case of dispute, Congress has the power to decide who shall be president. So basically the president wakes up from the coma, goes down to Congress and says, I'm president again. And he's president again. If there's some kind of problem, I guess Congress has the power to decide who shall be president. This is in the 25th Amendment. So we've seen a few different amendments on these notes. Make sure that you know the difference. The 22nd Amendment is the term limit amendment that you can serve for 8 year or 2 terms, 10 years total. And the 25th Amendment is the presidential disability kind of amendment. Okay. All right, cool. Well, thanks for spending the time. Go ahead and answer the questions below as well. All right.